Now, a British couple have just revealed to the world the gender of their child after 5 years. They didn't want to prejudice, quote, the infant, so they kept the little fellow's sex a secret. Look, they're not alone in this ghastly game of human experiments. To tell us more is Peter Baklinski, who has been following this morbid campaign. You know, Peter, if it was unique, I suppose we could dismiss it as one group of neurotic loons, but there are several incidents like this all over Europe now, and even North America. Can the law not intervene in some way?
I believe it's a cultural and social question especially. We need to go back and look at what the word gender means. It was a term constructed in the 1950s to distinguish someone's biological sex that they had at birth from their social role as a man or woman in society. So this term came into being, and people thought, well, we can divorce one's biological sex from the role that these people are expected to play as a man or woman in society.
I see.
And then radical feminism jumped on board with that distinction and said, well, to be a woman means to be, equal in every way to every other individual in the world. We need to divorce our biological sex from our own being.
But I mean, equality is a noble aspiration. It can become ideological and absurd, but generally equality is something that there's a consensus of approval. But that doesn't mean sameness. Genders are different. People are different. There are differences, and we rejoice in those. Anyone who has raised children, in fact, no, let me rephrase, not raised children, had children, knows that their differences are inevitable. There are stories, there are legion of girls being given masculine toys. There was a wonderful one that came out of, I think it was New Zealand, a little girl by some odd, weirdo, hippie parents, and she was given a train set. It was a boy's toy, and they couldn't find it. They finally discovered it under the bed, in a basket, wrapped in a blanket. She was using it as a baby.
Yes. Right now there's a study that just came out in the UK where a woman has said for women to be equal to men, they need to forego bearing children and give their child-bearing potential over to science and technology. We covered a story on that on LifeSite News. It's very similar to Huxley's Brave New World, where basically what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man has been taken away from the individual, handed over to the state, and people live almost genderless in society, seeking pleasure, seeking joy, whatever comes their way.
By the way, for those who haven't read Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, I think it was published in '48, I think, the same year as 1984. It's a better book. It's incredibly perceptive in explaining what will happen, not just state intervention, but how all of our lives are being controlled. In this case, look, if people want to be bizarre to themselves or to their partners, if there's consent, it's not really my business. But this is a child. Children are protected. They have to be by the state. That's important. We have cases where, for example, if motivated by religion, a parent says you cannot have a blood transfusion to a child, endangering that child, the state can intervene. I think there's probably a lot of strong argument behind that. To deny the child its natural gender, sex, is abusive. Are there no grounds for some sort of prosecution?
There may be some grounds. I know there is a reformed transsexual by the name of Walt Heyer. I believe he came on your show a few months ago.
He's been on the show 2 or 3 times, yes.
Yes. He thinks that this boy, whose name is Sasha, is being psychologically abused by his parents, and he wonders if there's a case here where someone should step in and stop the abuse. I've looked up some statistics. There was a study put out by the National Center for Gender Equality, and they teamed up as well as with the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. And in 2010, they released a report where they interviewed 7,000 people who identified themselves as transgendered or had gone through an actual operation and had identified themselves as transsexual. They found, quote, a staggering 41% of these people had attempted suicide. And this is opposed to the the national average, which is about 1.6%.
Yes.
So 41% of people who had thought they were transgendered or had gone through this operation to change themselves into the opposite sex had attempted suicide. And Walt Heyer is very clear about this. He himself was a young boy. His grandmother dressed him up in a dress, thinking it would be great to see this side of him, let him express himself as a girl. And he became confused as to whether he was a girl or a boy.
Now, of course, they will argue that the suicide attempt rate being so high is a result of societal oppression and discrimination. I don't think that's true at all. There's one more thing about this particular couple in Britain. After announcing, people don't find these stories by chance. They announced to the press, to the world, they would not give out the gender, the sex of their child. They then held a conference. They announced to the world when he was 5 years old, it's a boy. Any child exposed to international attention and scrutiny, that's abusive in itself. Children should be protected from this. They have to be allowed to develop. At so many levels, these parents are abusive, but they have money, they're upper middle class, they have connections, and they're politically on the hard left. They seem to get away with a great deal.
Right. And what we need to be concerned about is the well-being of this child. I think the parents are setting this child up for gender confusion. When the child gets older, he'll come to an age where, since he wasn't affirmed by his parents in his biological birth gender, he will get to a point where he'll question, well, who am I? And he'll wonder, Mom, Dad, why didn't you affirm me as a boy? Why didn't you help me to become all that I am to become as a male?
Yeah.
And, at some point, he might be the one bringing legal action against them
I hope
for
so.
the abuse that he suffered as a child right now.
I would love to see that happen. I've got a sneaking feeling they're going to be strange parents on all sorts of levels, and can't see them actually going to watch him play rugby on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate being on the show.